Hi and welcome back to another knitting podcast episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm currently trying to wrap up my spring knits and more transitional pieces before the summer starts. As always, I'm going to show you my works in progress, my finished objects, and also have some acquisitions that I want to share with you. So get comfortable, grab your knitting or any other crafting project you're working on, and let's get started. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing so you don't miss my future episodes. I have 3 finished objects to show you in this video, and the first one is my finished Harriet sweater, which I'm super pleased with. I really love how it came out, and I have been wearing it a ton since I made it, which I know I say a lot about my finished projects, but this one has just been so convenient to wear, especially in this kind of mixed transitional weather we've been having. This is designed by Lene, which was released in February. I fell in love with this colorwork motif ever since I saw it. It really reminded me of cross stitch. It was around the same time when, first of all, I finished my big colorwork project and I had like itchy fingers for colorwork. I wanted to knit another project with stranded colorwork, and also I was trying to figure out what to do with some BC Garn tweed that I received from a friend who was doing a D-stash. Another thing that really appealed to me about the Harriet sweater is that my last colorwork project was a circular yoke project, so I wanted to try something different to that construction. This one has a contiguous sleeve. It's a dropped shoulder fit, but the sleeve is knit at the same time as the body, and I just really love the fit of the sweater, especially compared to just regular modified drop shoulder or regular drop shoulder. It's just really, really polished and kind of more elevated. I was first of all excited to try it because I did give it a try when I was trying to knit the Maggie cardigan, but that project didn't work out for a different reason. I just had some issues with the gauge and I had a huge gap in between knitting it and lost my notes, whatever. I mentioned it before. I still want to do the Maggie cardigan, especially now after I finished the sweater and I see just how flattering and comfortable this type of sleeve construction is to wear. So I might give it a go. But anyway, the sleeve construction or the shoulder construction is similar there and in this sweater, and I really do recommend it. This was the first project where my chart was still continuing after I was done with the body. I know I did this Luma sweater where I had pretty much all over colorwork motif, but that was on my own accord. I wanted to modify that sweater that way, so I didn't feel like it was too complicated to do. But here, every time I finished a section of the colorwork motif on the body, the realization that I would have to do it 2 more times on the sleeves was really kind of demotivating. It wasn't that bad because the sleeves have a much smaller circumference. It was, again, really fun to see this colorwork open up. I really like the effect of knitting colorwork and the finished object of the colorwork, but knitting it is always so frustrating because, as I mentioned before, I knit colorwork really slowly because I'm a picker. I think it's called a picker. It might be called a thrower. I'm not actually sure. I knit really slowly when I do color work and I feel like I'm losing brain cells every time. After all of my experience, I shouldn't be that slow at it, but I'm getting better. I think it really comes with practice. I'm just excited to do more color work projects, but with the summer approaching, I'm not really sure if I'll be able to knit something warm weather that still has color work. I might do some sock knitting just to satisfy my color work itch, so to speak, which kind of sounds disgusting, but whatever. I also really enjoyed working in a smaller gauge on this sweater. I was knitting it on 3.5 needles. Originally, the Harriet sweater is designed for 4mm needles. It uses fingering weight wool plus silk mohair held together. So I knew that my gauge would be a little bit smaller. I wanted to use this yarn or these 2 yarns on their own. I didn't want to pair them with anything because they're just so soft and just so pleasant, especially after blocking. They bloom and open up so well. I don't have anything against silk mohair. I love pairing silk mohair with my yarns, but here I just didn't want to do it. I wanted this yarn to shine on its own. I knew my gauge would be smaller because I tried to make a swatch on 4mm needles and it was just way too loose and open. I did a colorwork swatch on 3.5 to see how different my gauge would be in the hopes that I would be able to knit a larger size to get a smaller size, if that makes sense. This design has a lot of positive ease and it's extremely oversized. Even the smallest size, which is double XS, has a bust circumference of 114 centimeters, if I'm not mistaken. So it's at least 30 centimeters of ease. It's just huge, which is fine, but I didn't want it to be that oversized. My gauge was, I think, one stitch bigger or smaller. Like I had one extra stitch in my 10 centimeter swatch. So I was using 3.5 millimeter needles. I was doing size 2, knitting size 2 to get size 1. I think it worked out really well. I just really love how the sweater fits me. In general, this sweater has taught me so much about my garment preferences and what I would like to knit and wear, because I have been wearing it pretty much daily ever since I made it. I adore this sweater. It's just such a pleasant garment to wear. I think it's partly because of the smaller gauge. It's super lightweight. I think I used maybe like 5 skeins of this gray yarn, which is, by the way, Semilla Melange from BC Garn, and it's the colorway light gray. And the red one I used, really annoyingly, 1 ball and 10 grams. So I used 60 grams in total for this color work. And this is Loch Lomond, also from BC Garn, in the shade Fire Red. So in total, this sweater weighs 310 grams, which is really lightweight for a sweater, especially the one that has color work on the chest, which means it's kind of double-sided here, and it's a lot kind of warmer in this area. So it's also not too oversized, but just slouchy enough for me to be able to wear a layer underneath it if I need to, which is super convenient. Also, because it's light, it's easy to take it off and put it in my bag if I need to get rid of a layer. Another great thing about the sweater is that since it's so soft, it's fine to wear against the skin if you need to. It also doesn't have a halo. It has some kind of fluffy, like micro halo on it, but it doesn't shed fibers on other like clothes, especially like on darker pants you might wear with the sweater. It doesn't attract fibers, which is a big issue for me as somebody who knits all the time, because I mostly either work at home in my knits or knit at home in my knits or do a combination of both. So there's this one sweater, for example, the waffle loop sweater, which I knit in December. I haven't been reaching for it at all. It attracts any dust, get hair, fluff, mohair, hair, regular hair, you name it. And it's really hard to actually sit down to knit in it because you have to do so much de-shedding and use like a whole roll of lint roller to get rid of all the stuff, which isn't really easy to do because it's textured. It has both this like waffle texture and cables on it, and all of these little fibers get stuck in between the stitches, and it's just so hard to keep it looking tidy. And it got so annoying that I just subconsciously stopped reaching for that sweater, even though it's in a really basic color. It's super warm, and it's also made in a really smooth yarn, even smoother than this one. It was made in this super fine merino, I think it's called. It's smooth, really silky. Loved working with it, but man, it was just, I don't know. I will try and use a like anti-static spray on it. I thought about that, but then I forgot. So I'm gonna try that to see if I can sort of rescue it and get it back from this like high maintenance limbo it's in. And the reason I'm mentioning the waffle loop at all is because it's the complete opposite to what I have to do to this sweater, which is nothing. I don't have to maintain it at all. I think if I cherished it less, I would have slept in it as well, but I just respect my work too much to do that. And yeah, I don't even know what else to say. Like the pattern was great. I really enjoy Lene patterns. I really like her writing style. I did also, forgot to mention, modify the neckline. The neckline originally is a longer mock neck, but I wanted to try this double knit edging. Kind of went for it to see what it would look like. I think it worked fine, especially with me doing it for the first time. I just picked up more stitches, like twice as many stitches as it asked for the neckline, and knit, if I remember correctly, 10 rounds of double knitting. So I slipped one of the stitches. I was like alternating between which stitch I slipped. Then I just knit a round of knitted togethers and switched to the ribbing, and I really like the result. I also did the twisted ribbing on the cuff, and I'm not really happy with these cuffs because, as you can see, the twisted rib is really biasing and I don't know how to fix it, and it frustrates me so much because I usually know how to fix any issues with my knitting, and it kind of is the problem of whether I'm ready to spend the time to actually fix it or if I'm fine with that being visible or not fixed. But here I have no idea how to deal with that. I tried to block it and like pin it out to be, you know, not in this angle, but didn't work. As soon as I took it off the pins, it started biasing again, and I tried to Google it, and as far as I understand, it's just the nature of twisted rib. It's not really something you can fix. It's just going to be biasing the more you knit it, but I don't know. I don't believe that. There must be a way to fix it. I just haven't figured it out yet. If you have any suggestions on how to prevent this 5-degree angle on your twisted rib, please let me know, because I don't really knit it too often, so I don't know if it's just me. And also I had this issue with the dye lot, which I mentioned last time when I was knitting this sweater, but to be honest, since I finished it, blocked it, and started wearing it, shockingly, I forgot about it. I only remembered that I had this dye lot issue when I started to gather my notes for this video, so it's absolutely fine. I also tried to hide the dye lot change. It was in the main color. I tried to change it in the last kind of rounds of my colorwork, so the gradient, or like not the gradient, the switch is not too noticeable, and I think it looks okay. I had to switch back to the original dye lot on the ribbing on the body, but again, I don't think from afar you really can tell, and even if you can tell, your brain kind of doesn't realize that something is wrong. So also I used a tiny bit of this green yarn at the borders of the colorwork motif. This was my leftovers of Einband yarn, which is a rowing wool. And I ended up using 3 strands held together. So overall, I'm really happy with the colors I chose. I really love this sweater. I think of it as my kind of Vyshyvanka style project. As I talked about before, I wanted it to be my handmade Vyshyvanka project, since I don't embroider and I don't really have the option to make a Vyshyvanka without learning to embroider from scratch. I was intending to wear it on Worldwide Vyshyvanka Day, which was on the 15th of May, and I did, technically, sort of, but we had 5 degrees outside and it was raining all day, so I was wearing it under layers and layers of other stuff and nobody really saw it, which was a bummer. But it's just so funny that I was actually worried that it would be too hot to wear the sweater on that particular day, but it ended up being too cold even with me wearing the sweater and like 2 layers over it. I also had some really funny, lighthearted, but still a bit offensive, arguments with my real life friends who try to convince me that this doesn't count as a Vyshyvanka, which I disagree. Respectfully, they say that for this sweater to be considered a Vyshyvanka, you need to have some motifs on the cuffs here, and the cuffs need to be like gathered. Also, you have to have the motif actually run down your collar, and it's never knit, it's always embroidered, blah blah blah. To be honest, I don't care. I still consider it to be Vyshyvanka inspired, and I really love it. I really hope I mentioned everything about it, because I need to move on to other projects. I feel like I've been talking about it forever at this point. I think in the future I would be excited to work with more lighter gauges, and also with this yarn in particular, or something similar to it, because of how lightweight and soft it is. So yeah, a 10 out of 10 banger project. My next finished object is something I haven't actually introduced as a work in progress, and I'm really sorry, I just went straight into it. I did talk about it in my spring knitting plans, but once I cast it on, it just went by really quickly, mostly because at that point all of my works in progress were in a more complicated state, where I had to either pick up stitches for the sleeve or continue the color work in the Harriet sweater, so I just needed some easy stockinette to work on. And this is my Semplice blouse, or heavily modified Semplice blouse. This is a pattern by Cookie the Knitter, who is one of my favorite designers at the minute. I do have another pattern from her on my needles right now, which I'm really enjoying, but I'll talk about it later. This one was super straightforward. It's actually a pattern from 2020, which brought back some memories. I remember how different knitting was in 2020. A lot of chunky sweaters going around, a lot of kits going around as well. All of those like paneled chunky sweaters, because a lot of people were getting into knitting during the pandemic, which is really interesting to reflect on. I'm not one of those people. I started knitting before. I do remember this like huge surge in knitting, and this pattern actually also reminds me of those like 2020 style knits. It's mostly because this design is super beginner friendly as well, and the shaping is minimal and really simple. It does have shaping. It has some shaping at the front section here. You actually knit the back, like the beginning of the back, flat, and do your shirt rows only at the front here at the neckline, and then you also do some sleeve cap shaping when you start knitting the sleeves, but otherwise it's super straightforward. It really reminds me of the construction for the Stockholm sweater from Petiteknit, which is also a classic simple stockinette pattern. And I did modify this sweater, or not sweater, this blouse. It's a short-sleeved blouse made entirely in mohair originally, but I used a different combination of yarn. I'm gonna mention it in a sec, but I modify it, as you can see, to be a cardigan. I split it down the middle. I know that some people, for example, don't change their stitch count. They just split the front down the middle without like subtracting any stitches. They just add the button band afterwards. Or you can maybe steek the sweater if you're feeling fancy. You can just add extra stitches for the steek and do all this work to be able to knit your actual sweater turned cardigan in round, but I'm usually not that fussed about it. I just subtract the number of stitches I would approximately need for my button band and knit 2 halves of the front without those stitches and then kind of add them later when I do the button band, and I think it works well enough. That's what I usually do. And here I have some regrets about the button band, to be honest, specifically about the buttonholes. I did make a mistake because I used 17 stitches for the button band, so I cast on 17 stitches here. So I was knitting these 2 sections separately, and I thought it would be logical to split my stitches 8 and 8 and then have this extra stitch which I don't count, which is actually used to attach my button band to the body section. So it was actually 9 and 8. And that was a mistake because when you pull the button through this hole, your button band starts to really kind of stretch to the side because the button is stretching it. This part thins out a lot, and I should have used a distribution of 6 here and 11 here, something like that. Like I should have put it a lot closer to the body section here because I ended up having to, as you can see, go in and add a crochet round. And because I started to knit the button band after I did the neckline, I had to then continue this crochet border on the neckline on the other side here, and I just spent a whole evening doing the stupid crochet border, which I didn't really need in the first place. But when I buttoned up this cardigan, my button band looked super wonky and fluty, like wavy like that. I realized that I needed to make it a little bit thicker, so that's my big regret about this project, but otherwise, no regrets. I really, really like it. It looks really vintage because of the yarn I chose, I think, and because of the buttons I used, and maybe because of the fit in general. I'm also really excited that I finally got to use some buttons from my thrifted button stash. I'm not sure if you can count them as vintage or thrifted, but I'm glad they're used up in this button band. I think they match this yarn perfectly. This like matte black color matches this yarn really nicely because it's a tweed yarn and it has some black specks in it, so they kind of complement each other. But I do have an issue that kind of arose because I used these particular buttons, is that I originally split the small double knit section I did on the cuffs here. I split it because I wanted to use a smaller kind of complementary button, the same as my front buttons, and do a little crochet loop. But this is the quantity I had. I didn't have any more of these buttons. I didn't have smaller ones in the same sort of design or shape. Now I'm not really sure if I should leave it open without doing anything to it because it looks kind of finished enough as it is with this little split. Maybe I could do I-cord ties, but at the same time, I don't think I-cord ties and like little bows here will match this more minimalistic and put together design. Let me know what you think. I think the easiest way for me to solve this little issue would be to just go to my local buttons store and pick up some smaller buttons that match these ones, because it's just a black round button with a shank. I don't think it's going to be that hard to find something similar. A little side note, our local button store, I think you can call it, is one of the coolest places we have here. It's been open for decades basically, and their selection of buttons is mostly vintage. It's just really a fascinating place to be in. They have these like books of buttons. The staff isn't really super friendly, so I hope I can maybe get some footage of this store the next time I go there, because it's just a really cool place with, unfortunately, a rather kind of mean staff, but whatever. I'm also really glad to be rid of this tweed, which is a Lana Grossa country tweed. I think it's been discontinued since I got it in 2023. I just had it in my stash since forever, and I had 2 failed projects from it. One of them was an Illa sweater, which I got pretty far on. I just tried it on at one point and realized that I'm not gonna wear it. Like, it's too kind of boho style for me, so I unraveled that one, and that's also the yarn I was knitting my failed Maggie cardigan from. So the fact that it's not in my stash anymore and it's not a pile of frogged and steamed yarn, but an actual finished garment is really exciting. I also paired it with this alpaca mohair. I actually checked with my local yarn store, and this is 70% polyamide, which is not usually the amount of synthetic fiber I want to have in my yarn, but it was on sale at the time, and it also matched my tweed. The fluff here is on this like black strand, which also complements the black specks on the tweed. I was worried that it would be kind of too synthetic to the touch and it will ruin the softness of this tweed, which is similar to the BC Garn tweed. After blocking, this yarn softens up a lot and this yarn blooms a lot, so they kind of merge into each other, and the fabric is super soft and doesn't actually feel synthetic, so it worked out great. But after finishing the Harriet sweater, I think I made a bit of a mistake to try and bulk up this yarn with something, because it's, again, really similar to the BC Garn tweed. I just really enjoy wearing this yarn like in one strand, when here it's much thicker, so it's more of like a DK weight fabric. I was knitting this on 4mm needles. It feels a little bit too thick. It's not bad, like I would still wear it, and it is really warm for a blouse. I'm not intending to actually wear it as a cardigan. I think I would have it buttoned up. When I was knitting this, I briefly contemplated maybe making the sleeves longer, because I felt like I would have enough yarn for that, but I decided to try and make a short sleeve first and see how it goes, and I actually just really liked how the shorter sleeve looked. Instead, I decided to use my leftover yarn to knit a little scarf, because as you know, if you watched my scarf roundup video, I lost my Sophie scarf, which is really tragic. I know I can just knit another one without a problem, but the yarn was a bit sentimental for me. I bought it in Copenhagen when I went there. I had just one ball, like one single ball of this yarn. It was just perfectly used up in this really nice and basic Sophie scarf. I don't think I even have a picture of it. I will try and find it, but yeah, please don't tie your Sophie scarves around your bag if you don't knot them really tightly, because they will slip and they will fall off somewhere and you will notice it only 2 hours later. So don't do it, please. So I decided I would use up my leftover yarn to make a small scarf to kind of substitute for my lost Sophie scarf, and I settled for the Jacques Scarf. Actually, I did mention it in my scarf roundup video and I really liked it, but mine is a bit more like a Sophie scarf. I consider it to be my sort of introduction to this pattern, because I do want to make it eventually. It's not like it's super complicated, but it needs some getting used to, especially if you haven't done intarsia before. You have to manage your little balls of yarn and everything, but the pattern is super thorough. I really enjoyed just reading through it. It had a lot of useful information, so I really recommend Laura Penrose's designs in that sense. I originally wanted to use this yarn with some other leftover tweed that I had. I felt like it would be a nice striped mix, not too low contrast that you don't really see that it has stripes, but then it kind of not dawned on me, it's not that dramatic, but I just realized that if I use these 2 yarns, I would have leftovers of both, and I didn't want to have 10 grams of both of these yarns left after finishing the scarf. And I also didn't want to do this mirroring of my contrast and main color like the pattern suggests, because I honestly just don't like how it looks. Like, maybe it has its place, but not for these yarns and like the scarf I had in mind. So I decided I would just make a smaller scarf without any intarsia. I unraveled my attempt with these yarns and just used the Lana Grossa tweed, and I actually didn't follow the increase decrease rate the pattern suggests. I did just a standard increase every 8th row and started decreasing after the last increase to have this little point here, and started my decreases at the same rate. It grew a lot with blocking, and it is kind of curving because of my double knit edge. I try to not knit it too tightly, but it still kind of curves on itself a bit, but it's stretchy enough. I just really like it. It does fill this gap the Sophie scarf left in my wardrobe, and I think eventually I will find a combination of yarns I would like to use for the bigger Jacques scarf. As I mentioned in that scarf video, I might go for Sandnes Garn Sunday, which I haven't used in a while, and it has a lot of nice colors to pair together. So this was a nice little palette cleanser. I do really recommend this pattern, especially for beginners. I also kind of accidentally have a matching accessory for my Semplice blouse turned cardigan, so really excited about that as well. And I think this leftover what a voice crack. Oh my god. I will save this little leftover ball to maybe eventually use in some colorwork project I would do where I would need a little bit for a contrast color. And I'm actually planning to work with Tweed more. Can't even believe I'm gonna say it, but I enjoy working with Tweed more than I do with Lopi. I like it more than Lopi, I'm so sorry. It's mostly because Lopi is really fluffy and it gets everywhere when you knit with it. It produces these like dramatic dust bunnies that are really hard to get rid of. So this one is just soft, no halo, no dust bunnies. I'm a bit obsessed with Tweed at the moment, which will probably come to an end soon because we're moving into summer and my preferences for yarns are going to change for the next season. But anyway, that's all with the finished objects, actually. You might notice a conspicuous absence of one project in my list of finished objects, and that's because I wasn't able to finish the Harriet sweater in time for my boyfriend's birthday. It's still on my needles, which I'm really bummed out about, but I have a good reason why I didn't finish it in time, and that's because I got sick. I was sick for like 2 weeks in April and lost 2 weeks of knitting time. The only thing I could relatively work on was the Semplice blouse, which was just rounds or rows of stockinette without having to do the math or like check the length or anything like that. Also, at that point, this sweater became heavy. It had maybe like 600 grams of yarn in it, so it was just heavy for me to pick it up. And it was also at the point where I needed to pick up stitches for the sleeves, and I just wasn't in the brain space to do it. My boyfriend was really supportive. He said that I didn't have to finish it in time. He will have it when he has it. Like, eventually he will still receive the finished object and probably he won't really get much use of it during the summer. But my deadline is mostly self-imposed because I don't like to have lingering whips, and I'm not really prone to UFOs or projects that are just on my needles for a really long time without me actively working on them. I'm limited mostly to like 3 works in progress, otherwise I get really overwhelmed. So the fact that this yarn was originally purchased for a Moby sweater, which I unraveled because I had some issues with this pattern, then I started this sweater, and it's taking me like 2 months to get through it, even though it doesn't have any complicated design features, it doesn't have any color work or cables or anything like that. It's just taking a long time. Is really frustrating to me, and it's so boring. I really start to dislike this project. Every time I sit down to knit on this sweater, it's like the time stands still. Especially compared to my other works in progress, which just fly off my needles. I'm really starting to dislike the stitch pattern. I'm starting to dislike this yarn, the feel of this yarn, just everything about it. So please wish me luck. I also kind of lost my innocence. I always thought that the boyfriend sweater curse refers to similar frustrations as I'm having with this knit, where it's just really hard to go through with a project for your significant other or something. But no, turns out it refers to you breaking up after the project is finished. I can't say like I'm worried. I don't think this project will affect my relationship with my boyfriend, but I truly was convinced for, I don't know, a couple of months since I first heard about the boyfriend sweater curse that it just refers to you being more frustrated or not being able to like finish a project for your significant other without any issues arising along the way. But oops. To be fair, I am quite close to finishing this one. I did knit almost the whole of the body. I just need to do a couple more pattern repeats before I can start on the ribbing on the body and then do the long Italian cast off. Maybe I shouldn't talk about this project and just knit it in silence, because the more I talk about it, the more I feel like it's a mammoth project. And I think a lot of it is self-imposed. So yeah, let me just maybe instead talk about the yarn I'm using for it, which I did talk about before. This is Alize Wooltime. My kind of frustrations about this project aside, it's a really soft and nice yarn to work with. I really like how this sweater looks on him, and he likes it too, which is the most important part. The fit, even before blocking, is good enough. I think with blocking it's going to be even better, so fingers crossed I can finish it someday. This next work in progress is something you haven't seen before, but I actually mentioned it in my spring knitting plans, and this is my Palme Tee. This is the second Palme Tee I'm knitting. My first one is one of my favorite summer garments. I wear it all the time, so I wanted another one in black. For some reason, I remember this lace yoke to be such a slog and to be really time consuming, but it really wasn't. It was super easy to memorize. It took me maybe a couple of days. I actually zoned out and knit too many lace repeats and realized that only after I split for body and sleeves, so I had to frog back and fix my mistake. I considered leaving it, but even before blocking, and since I knit this pattern before, I know the lace opens up a lot after blocking. Even before that, it's too low on my chest, and like my chest circumference is not impressive, so it would just be way too low and you will just see my bra through the lace, and I didn't really want that, so I wanted it to just stop a little bit higher. So I frocked back, I knit a couple of more rounds of stockinette, and I'm much more happier with it now. And the sleeves also flew by really fast. I think each sleeve took me like 2 hours at most. The sleeve itself took just as long as the ribbing here, and I also tried to do twisted ribbing, mostly to just see if it's gonna bias again or not, and it does. So maybe it is a feature of this stitch pattern. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just how I knit twisted ribbing and I'm doing everything correctly. I don't really know what's going on, but here you can really see that it's biasing because it's much shorter. My first Palme Tee was knit in size small, but for this one I decided to size up to size medium just to make it a little bit more roomy, especially in the arms. I'm using Sandnes Garn Lene, which is the recommended yarn and the yarn I used last time, but this time it's this graphite color. I really love this yarn. It's one of my favorite summer yarns. I just love every stitch I'm knitting with it. It doesn't have that really weird sensory feeling that some cotton yarns or some linen yarns have. I bought 7 balls of Lene just as the pattern suggests for my size, but I don't think I'm gonna crack even into the 6th ball, let alone the 7th, so maybe keep that in mind. But I'm not really sure if it depends on my tension or anything like that. But I had the same situation with the previous Palme Tee I was knitting. It was asking for 6 balls of Lene and I ended up using 5. I'm actually, after I'm finished with this one, gonna be knitting my third Palme Tee, and it happened absolutely accidentally. I was just discussing summer yarns with one of the people in my local knitting group at my local yarn store. The Palme Tee came up. Long story short, I'm gonna be knitting another Palme Tee for my friend from the knitting group. She does have the pattern and she was intending to knit it herself, but her sort of tragedy is that she has great taste. She wants to knit everything, but she doesn't have enough time to practice her knitting skills. She just asked if I could knit this for her. She kind of outsourced her knitting to me. I know there's a lot of discourse online regarding commissions, and especially commissions from commercial patterns, but I honestly don't think it's an issue here in this case because she does have the pattern. She just saw that I knit it as well and I really enjoyed the pattern, enjoyed working with the yarn, and asked me if I could do it, and I said yes. And because she's a knitter as well, she does know how much time these things take. The price she offered for my time and my work was quite reasonable, so yeah, I agreed. And once I'm done with this one, I just want to block it and really measure it to see what I can maybe alter with this project, because I also will be knitting size M, size medium for her, but she is a bit taller than I am and the chest circumference is a bit different, so I need to account for that. And unfortunately, for my third Palme Tee, I won't be working with Lene, which is a bummer, but our local Sandnes Garn distributor did not have the colorway she wanted, so instead we went for this Drops Bell, which is pretty much an exact dupe for Sandnes Garn Lene. It's not as soft, but it's a little bit cheaper. The composition is let me see. Yeah, the composition is the same. It's exactly the same. The tension is the same. I just noticed the meterage is different. This one is 10 meters longer than the Lene yarn. So once I'm done with my Palme Tee, I'm gonna cast on another one and we'll just see how this yarn is different to Lene, so I'll let you know my feedback, but I think it's gonna be fine. I might get a bit emotional while talking about this next work in progress, so I apologize in advance if that happens, but I had a lot of issues with my Sirena sweater. If you remember from my last episode, I had to frog that project even though I was really enjoying it because the yarn I was using got discontinued halfway, even though the store assured me that it's in stock and I can get more if I need to, but regardless, it's all in the past. And in that episode, since I released that video, a lot of my viewers reached out with suggestions about what I can do to kind of save that project, yarn substitution options, and just good feedback and suggestions in general. But this one viewer messaged me and offered to pay for a whole new quantity for me to restart the sweater in a different yarn. It's one of the kindest and most like surreal things that a stranger has ever done to me. And I feel so grateful for this knitting community. And I really hope I can pay the kindness of this person forward. So if you're watching this, thank you again. You really saved this project and made my day, made my week, made my month, made this whole project possible because I have restarted, as you can see, my Sirena sweater and I'm having so much fun knitting this. I love this knit. I know it's going to turn out great. It's really hard to gather my thoughts and talk about anything technical regarding this project because I'm just so giddy and so overwhelmed. The yarn we chose was this Katia cotton merino because of course the yarn opera in a different colorway was already out of stock as I expected, but we settled for this concept by Katia Cotton Merino, which is 30% merino and 70% cotton. It's super soft. Also doesn't have this like sensory unpleasant feel to it. It's really pleasant to work with. And I paired it with the silk mohair I showed you before, this light brown silk mohair. And I really like this melange effect it gives me, even though this is also a chain net yarn, just as my opera yarn I was using for the first Sirena sweater. It doesn't stretch as much, which means that it's a bit thicker compared to the opera. And I was able to pair it with silk mohair instead of holding a double, which means that this version is actually much better than the original. It's a lot lighter. I think it's still going to be warm during winter because it does have silk mohair, but for like really cold summer days, I think I will still find use for it. Probably because it's going to be too beautiful not to wear it even in the summer. I'll find a way to like incorporate it into my summer wardrobe just because of how excited I am about this project. And all this progress you see here was knit in less than a week. It's not because I'm rushing it, it's just because of how quickly on these larger needles these cables are knit up, and these cables are super comfortable to knit. You don't have any cabling on the wrong side, they all line up with each other nicely, so it's really easy to memorize the pattern because you can kind of tell when you need to do the next cable repeat just by the width of the cables themselves. And because you have this smaller cable that is knit on every right side row or like every second round if you're knitting in the round, it's also really easy to count your progress and like remember the pattern repeats. So I'm just really enjoying it. I love this pattern. I do really recommend it. I had like 4 different people ask me lately if I would prefer the Moby sweater pattern to the Sirena because they can't choose between the two, and I would recommend this one. I would recommend the Sirena sweater because it's on a bigger needle, it's faster to knit, it doesn't have this kind of inconvenient twisted stitch on every second row that you have to do. Also, the shaping is a bit better than the Moby sweater, so and the feeling of having enough yarn, knowing that you don't have to play yarn chicken, that you have exactly the yarn you need, in the exact quantity you need, in the exact color you like to finish the project in the exact size you want is just freaking beautiful. I just really, really love it. And again, I'm just so thankful. I got sick right after I recorded my last podcast, literally the next day, and I was editing that podcast from bed. So when I released it and saw this message from a viewer who just, wanted to gift me this colorway, this quantity, whatever you want to call it, it was just so surreal, and it just made me feel really grateful and really kind of taken care of. So thank you again. I'm just I'm gonna get all soppy. So I'm also really excited to finally see the sleeves on my Sirena sweater because I just remember it in this state. Doesn't matter which version you're talking about, I just remember it always being this kind of blob with no sleeves. I also mentioned last time that I wanted to use up my original Sirena yarn for the Jenny jacket or Jenny jacket v-neck from Petiteknit, but I wanted to pair it with this silk mohair I ended up still using for the new Sirena. It just got all confusing. I needed to find a different silk mohair for it, and I settled for this white Lana Gatto silk mohair, mostly because it was on sale. It's too white for me. I usually don't go for this like super bright porcelain white. I go for something more off-white, but these yarns looked really nice together. Plus, as I mentioned, it was on sale, so it was not too expensive for this whole quantity. Even with all of the bad vibes surrounding this original yarn, I still really like this iridescent shine it has, and I think it pairs with the white silk mohair quite beautifully. This is the swatch I ended up making. I really love this effect. I don't think this yarn looks too bright. I'm just really excited to start the Jenny jacket at some point, but I don't think I'm gonna do it at least until I finish the Sirena sweater. I don't know, maybe it's because I was sick and I was getting back into knitting quite slowly after recovering, so I feel like this amount of works in progress, like this exact list of works in progress has been with me for a long time, especially the Heather sweater. You know my feelings about that one, so I just want to get something done. And once I'm done with the Sirena, with the Heather sweater, I'm gonna also have a little treat and cast on a vintage knit, which is something I wanted to do for ages, but just didn't have time. Or other times there was a pattern that I really wanted to try, but couldn't find a suitable yarn to knit it with or to get gauge with, so I had to abandon the whole idea. But this time I think I'm ready. Everything finally lined up. I have the pattern I want to make, I have the yarn which I got gauge with, and it's gonna be exactly my size, which is kind of hard with some vintage patterns because they only usually come in one size. I'm ready. I'm ready to jump into it and do my first proper vintage knit that isn't a doily, which nothing against doilies. I love knitting doilies, but I want to have a knitted vintage garment. The pattern I'm going to be knitting is Patons 277, and it's a blouse from the 1940s. I recently got reminded of this blouse when I was rewatching Retro Claude videos, who knit this blouse in 2020, and she does have it in her coffee shop. She has the original like pattern scanned if you want to check it out and buy it from her. It's this absolutely unique, beautiful 1940s blouse with both lace, cables, and colorwork, and it's knit bottom up in panels as most 1940s blouse patterns are, and this colorwork or Fair Isle band on the neckline is just so unique and so adorable. I really want to recreate it. I feel like it's gonna be challenging, but again, I'm ready. I'm ready to jump into it. I got gauge. I did a gauge swatch. I did actually many gauge swatches before I managed to get the correct tension for this pattern, but now I just need to cast it on, and I want to finish one of my works in progress before I jump into this project because it's gonna be a long road, so to speak. And the yarn I'm gonna be knitting this with is this alpaca silk, which I originally bought for like a Victorian style lacy shawl. I kind of put it aside because I couldn't decide on the pattern I wanted to knit the shawl with, and when I saw this Patons blouse, I immediately started to think what I can knit it from if I'm only choosing between the yarns I already have in my stash, and this one seemed like the most appropriate option because this is similar in weight to the 2-ply vintage yarn described in the pattern, or like the tension is similar. It's actually a 3-ply yarn, which is really interesting. It's not a 3-ply weight, but it is really similar to 2-ply in terms of weight. The first swatch I did was on 3mm needles, and I was so excited about this one. I was like, yes, I'm gonna get gauge, it's gonna be so beautiful. I'm gonna do a bigger swatch so I can kind of get familiar with the pattern, stitch motif, whatever, but no, it's drastically too big. It's just huge. It's not what I need. I had to size down to 2.5 and do another swatch. So I made the swatch, and then I decided for the last repeat, just for fun, I'm gonna try in 2mm needles. And guess what? Only 2mm needle swatch was in an accurate gauge I needed, and now I'll have to knit this project on 2mm needles, which I'm not looking forward to be honest. But I do have to figure some stuff out before I start knitting this blouse because, for example, I want to knit my ribbing in the round. I think in the round the ribbing will look much neater. I don't think I need seams for the ribbing. I made a swatch on 2mm needles for the 2x2 rib it asks for, and I don't like the kind of wonky and zigzaggy nature of this rib. I think it's mostly because of this yarn. It doesn't have the best stitch definition. I still really like it. It's really soft and luxurious. But anyway, I need to figure out how to do the ribbing in the round, but still knit the body in panels because I do want to block it before I sew it up. I'll have to figure it out. If you have any suggestions, or if you by any miracle knit this pattern before, please let me know your thoughts. Regarding the colorwork section, I think I'm gonna do the same thing as Claude did for her blouse and get some embroidery wool for the colorwork section, because you do need just a tiny amount of every color, and this alpaca silk is so freaking expensive. I honestly didn't really remember how expensive it was. I bought it as a gift to myself because I don't remember. I either just stashed some yarn and kind of got some money back for it, or just something prompted me to pay this much money for this stupid yarn. I don't think it's worth it, to be honest. I'm really sorry, but it's so freaking expensive. And I do have enough to do the blouse, but if I buy like 5 skeins in different colors just to use a tiny amount for the color work, it just sounds ridiculous. I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna go with like embroidery wool, and I have a really nice embroidery store near me which have really nice and like luxurious embroidery floss and stuff. It's like a local yarn store, but for embroidery it's really fancy, so I think they'll be able to hook me up with something that will suit the gauge and the pearly sheen of this yarn. And it's just gonna take me a really long time, but I'm really excited to finally do it. Plus, my luck is that my bust circumference is pretty much the same the pattern asks for, so I won't have to do any modifications. Bless you. We have a little special guest. She drank some water and now her chin is super wet. Oh, that's adorable. The last work in progress I have for you is actually a sewing work in progress, which is something I've never shared before, I think, on here. I haven't gotten really far, but I did cut out my pieces and interfaced the facing. So I'm really excited to start this weekend. This is puffed sleeve Peplum blouse from Sunday School Designs, and I did sew a blouse from the same pattern last year, but I'm not entirely happy with it because I was still really new. I'm still really new, but I was even more of a newbie back then, and I used linen, which was really wiggly and really annoying. The fibers kept doing this snaky thing. It was really hard to keep the grain straight, and I think I made mistakes in a couple of places when I was cutting out my pieces. The grain is really wonky on some of my seams. Plus, I attached the sleeves wrong. I have sewn one of the sleeves on top of the body piece and like stitched over it, and the other sleeve I did the other way around. So one of the sleeves has like this prominent puff shoulder and the other one has like this droopy shoulder. And I only realized that I made a mistake after I cut out my own bias binding from this snaky linen and attached it, miraculously attached it. I was just too frustrated to unpick it and try again. And I did wear it a couple of times, but I need to do a lot of like strategic ironing, crumpling, and doing this motion all the time to not have the sleeves be really different and asymmetrical. So wasn't happy with that one, but I really did like that pattern. As a beginner, it wasn't unclear or complicated at all. It has a lot of illustrations, all of the step-by-step instructions you might need, and I just want to make another one, but this time in a firmer fabric. This wool isn't super firm, but it's not as wiggly as that linen. So also for this blouse, for the gathered peplum and for the gathered sleeves, I would do something that I kind of came up with myself, and I'm sure that it's actually a wrong technique and nobody does that for a reason. But when I first thought about it, I thought that it was not genius, but like a really convenient way to gather fabric. And what I do is I go along the seam allowance with a shirring thread or like elastic thread and kind of shirr it a little bit. The gathers are more even than when I do them by hand, and I would definitely do this for this one. I actually have a lot of sewing plans for the upcoming summer, and I have a lot of fabric that I want to finally turn into garments. And if you want to see that, it's going to be too long to ramble about in my like summer knitting plans or just in my knitting podcast in general, so I can make maybe a separate video talking about my sewing plans. As I said, I'm a beginner. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Half of my terminology is confusing confused with the Ukrainian terminology because half of the stuff I know about sewing I learned from like YouTube, and the other half I learned at my sewing classes, which of course were taught in Ukrainian, so all of this is like really mixed up. But regardless of that, I have a list of patterns that I really want to sew this summer, and if you want to see the list, let me know. Well, that was an inconvenient time to receive a spam call. I absolutely lost my train of thought and forgot what I was talking about. Anyway, let's move on to acquisitions. I have 2 yarn acquisitions besides the Drops Bell yarn, and the first one is this linen, which I picked up at my local yarn store, and it's actually hand dyed by the store's owner, Vita, who dyes yarn along with running a yarn store, which is really cool. It's 100% linen. It doesn't have anything else added to it, which really surprised me because it's so shiny and the color is really rich. I originally picked it up because it was one of the only DK weight linen yarns that are 100% linen and that are not in these like funky variegated colors. I wanted to use it for the genie top, which I wanted to knit this spring, but I'm kind of saying goodbye to that pattern. I wasn't able to make my gauge work for it, and I realized I don't really want to knit a summer top in this large gauge, because for me 4.5 needles is pretty large. Ever since making a swatch for the Patons blouse and trying to make a swatch from this linen yarn, I realized that I'm a loose knitter, so not a tight knitter, but a loose knitter. Because, for example, Vita showed me a swatch of this yarn knit on 4.5 needles, and it didn't look too loose or open, but I only managed to get a similar effect from 3.75, not even 4mm, but just 3.75. You can see that my 4.5 swatch is really kind of loose and open. If I'm knitting a blouse on 3.75 and my gauge is basically 20 stitches per 10 centimeters, I can just choose a different pattern. It's not really reasonable for me to stick to this genie top pattern if I can just knit pretty much anything else, because there are a lot of different patterns for summer garments or like warm weather garments knit in this gauge. And I remembered I wanted to knit the plain yoke blouse also from Lene. I will discuss all of my thoughts about that upcoming project in my summer knitting class video. Just know that probably plain yoke blouse is coming. I do have more of this yarn. I just had these 2 skeins to show you, and I have a little hunch that they are a different dye lot, but I think I can just ignore it. Another yarn, which is exactly the same color, but it's a different yarn, is Merino and Silk in a cone, which I bought because I also had some gauge issues with a project I wanted to knit for a long time, and it's the twist loop top. Doesn't matter which yarn I tried from my stash, my gauge is still too big, or like not my gauge, but like the yarn I'm using is too thick for that top, so I decided to bite the bullet and buy a thread weight yarn in a cone, which I can just apply into whatever gauge I need. And this is 70% merino and 30% silk. There's nothing much to say about it. I just really like this heathery gray color. I did do a swatch and I really liked it, so this is another project I'm gonna discuss in detail in my summer knitting plans video. I truly feel like the weather is mocking me. Like, look at this. I haven't seen a sliver of sunlight for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks. It was so gloomy and so disgusting outside, and now, of course, it wants to shine in my face. Lovely. But I think I actually discussed everything I wanted to discuss in this one. I'm so glad to be back with a knitting podcast, because after I was sick, I truly felt like I lost the ability to record videos. I barely got through my scarf video. I don't want to get too personal, but it hasn't been the best. I'm really hopeful for the summer and summer knitting and summer weather and all of that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'm gonna wrap it up before I get a sunburn. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I would really love to see you here again for my future videos. I wish you happy knitting, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.